Hi again. Doing well on the SAT writing section depends on knowing certain rules of grammar. Here we will be discussing some representative examples that deal with the most commonly tested rules of punctuation.
If after you watch this video you're still struggling with any of these concepts, consider Testive Coaching for additional support. Let's dive in.
One fairly straightforward but easy grammar rule that is tested on the new SAT writing section involves the proper use of an apostrophe to show possession. The rule is pretty simple. If you have a singular noun and you are trying to show that it owns something else, then you use an apostrophe followed by the letter S. So like this. For example, Sophie owns a cat. So we say that it is Sophie's cat. Just like that, with this denoting possession. This is true even when you have a common noun that ends in S. For example, you're talking about the size of the canvas, and you say the canvas's size. Same thing, you're going to be using that apostrophe S right there. So in situations where you have more than one person owning something, in other words, you have a plural noun, then you use an S followed by an apostrophe. For example, the girls' soccer ball, where you're talking about more than one girl owning that. A soccer team, for example, filled with a group of girls. The exception to this rule is when you have a collective plural noun. For instance, the women's soccer balls. Here, since woman is a plural noun, but it doesn't end in S, it's the fact that this is an E, not an A, that shows that it is plural. You're going to follow the same rule and use an apostrophe S, just like with Sophie's cat. So now we have this question here. And since we're talking about a singular nature, we're just going to add an apostrophe S to show that it is a singular nature that is owning the presence. It's going to be answer choice C.
One of the tricks that they like to play with respect to apostrophes is to put them in places where they simply do not belong. Remember, an apostrophe is used only to show possession or to create a contraction with the verb is. So for example, we just saw in the previous problem, we said Sophie's cat to say that the cat belonged to Sophie, and an apostrophe S at the end here. But then you can also use it for a contraction with the verb to be, so for the word is. So for example, she is coming could also be written she's coming, where we also have an apostrophe S, but this time it's not about possession. We're contracting she and is together. So, okay, when approaching a question where you see an apostrophe S or an S apostrophe, ask yourself whether the sentence is trying to show possession, like we saw in the example with Sophie's cat here, or if a contraction is appropriate, like we saw with the example here, where she's coming is a contraction of she is coming. The problem, however, is in this example, we have the word Badlands, which is a singular noun that just happens to end in S, the geological history of the Badlands. And the sentence is attempting to create a contraction with the verb is here. The geological history of the Badlands is fascinating. And we have our apostrophe S here. The problem is that changes the noun, so that instead of being the history of the Badlands with a plural noun here, badlands with an S at the end. Now we have the history of the bad land, where we don't have the S as being part of the noun, just so that we can have our contraction at the end. So we can't really do that with this contraction. So you cannot create a contraction with a singular noun that ends in S. So here, since we can't use that contraction, it is necessary to say the history of the Badlands is fascinating. So we're going to go ahead and select this answer choice, which has Badlands with an S at the end to keep it in the plural, and we're not contracting the word is.
This question is dealing with what is called a parenthetical phrase. When you hear parenthetical, think of parentheses. These phrases are things that aren't necessary. They can be removed from the sentence, and the sentence can still keep virtually the same meaning and continue to make sense. So when you have a parenthetical phrase, what you want to do when it comes to punctuation is place commas on both sides of the parenthetical phrase. So let's think of the phrase, by the way. If you had the sentence, for example, I like you, and by the way, I like your dog too, you would want to put commas on both sides of that by the way. Now, we're testing a similar principle here, but also we have an added difficulty. As you can tell from the answer choices, we need to decide if we want to use a period or not. So it's testing both run-on sentences and this parenthetical concept at the same time. Let's read. A chemical assay method has been developed that rapidly measures peroxide accumulation in diluted honey. By this procedure, different honeys have been found to vary widely in the sensitivity of their inhibin to heat. So this sounds really long-winded, and you can probably tell that it's a run-on sentence. Here, to more systematically determine this, we have a chemical assay as our subject, a chemical assay method, excuse me. And as our verb, we have this has been right here. And then we also have honeys right here, and this verb phrase have been found. So we have two subjects and verbs and no conjunction. That means we want a period right here after honey. And when we have one of these parenthetical phrases, sometimes they're called introductory phrases. If they're at the start of the sentence, you don't need to remember this. Nothing really changes if you have a period in front of it. You just leave that period. Of course, you're not going to have a comma and a period. So that's good enough for this beginning part right here. And then you want to keep this comma after procedure in order to separate this phrase still. So if we look at our answer choices now, no change is going to be wrong because we've added this period. Honey by this procedure with two commas is normally how you would punctuate a parenthetical, but since we do have the run-on sentence problem as well, this is not going to be our correct answer. Honey, comma by this procedure forgets the comma after procedure, so that's not going to be the correct answer. And that's why we're left with honey period by this procedure, comma.
Another important comma type question that shows up on the test is when you are presented with two adjectives and then you have to decide whether or not a comma will come in between them. For the purposes of this test, you will always have a comma in between two adjectives whenever you see them on the test. So here, for example, we have pre-writing is actually a misnomer because much of the pre-writing is just deep, focused thinking. So between both deep and focus, which are adjectives describing the noun here, thinking, which is this gerund noun, you must have a comma separating the two adjectives. So deep focus without the comma will be wrong. Just adding here a dash is unnecessary. This is also wrong. You want a comma between. And then obviously we can't have our semicolon because that's going to be separating two independent clauses. So just make sure that we have the comma between our two adjectives, and that should be good for this type of problem. Although it is correct to use a comma when linking two complete independent clauses, that's those clauses that have a subject and a verb, but using a conjunction, such as or, and, or but, a comma is not necessary when the conjunctions are used to join nouns, verbs, or dependent clauses. So dependent clauses are going to be those clauses that don't have a subject and a verb, so not independent clauses. Now in this sentence, the conjunction or is used to introduce the two alternate activities that can lead to winning. We have or over here to throw a football. So these are obviously going to be riding a bike or throwing a ball. So since there are only two activities and neither is an independent clause, we don't have a subject and a verb as part of these two activities. We've got just riding a bike or throwing a football. There's no need to use a comma to separate them. Therefore, the correct answer is simply ride a bike or throw a ball without the comma. A really important thing to remember here is commas are only going to be necessary when you're separating clauses. If you're not doing that, you shouldn't really worry about the use of a comma for the test. So the right answer will be answer choice B. Another instance where the use of a comma is required for the test is when you're presented with a sentence that will have two otherwise independent clauses, that is, clauses that have a subject or a verb. In this case, we have but as we, the subject here, acknowledge, verb on the first clause, and in the second we have we, again with the subject, and must as our verb. So these would otherwise be independent clauses, but one of the clauses is preceded by a subordinate conjunction. So this could be any conjunction, something like the word as here, but also something like the word so, or potentially the word but, etc., etc. So because we're beginning with one of these, this otherwise independent clause now becomes a dependent clause. So to separate it from the actual independent clause of the sentence, we're going to have to use a comma between the two clauses. So as we acknowledge human culture, comma, we must also acknowledge the natural environment. So that's going to have to be answer choice D.
It's always good to glance at your answer choices first when you're answering a question in a writing or English section of a standardized test, because you want a sense of whether you're looking for significant changes in meaning or whether you're just looking for changes in punctuation or simple grammar. Now, this whole lesson is on punctuation and simple grammar, so you can be reasonably sure that's what you're looking at, but we're still going to practice it the way that we would kind of perform on the actual test. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to glance at my answer choices here, and I'm going to see that really what I'm looking at, now when I look at no change, I also have to look at the actual sentence. And I'm looking at the highlighted portion here. So really what I can see is I'm looking at the difference between a comma, nothing, or a semicolon. That really I'm looking at just which of these is going to be correct. So I'm going to read the sentence. Actually, I'm going to go back one sentence. Early in the 19th century, Napoleon sat across a chessboard from a robot swathed in the robes of a Turk. Napoleon moved his chessmen into battle. The Turk did the same. Then, when Napoleon blundered... Okay, so I think I've got a sense of what's going on here in this sentence. Napoleon moved his chessmen into battle. The Turk did the same. So really, what I need to know here is, because I'm looking between a comma, a blank space, and a semicolon, I need to know a couple things. I need to know, I need to know which of these situations is true. Am I working with one complete sentence that's already grammatically correct? Am I working with two complete sentences? Or am I working with a potentially one complete sentence that needs something to fix it? Or two complete sentences that need something to fix it? So if it's already correct, then no change will be my answer. But let's see here. I have a subject. So I'm going to identify my subject and verb because that's how I'm going to figure out what kind of sentences I have. So I have a subject here, Napoleon, moved, which is a verb. So I have a subject and a verb here, and then some objects. Napoleon moved his chessmen into battle. That is a complete sentence that ends right here, potentially, depending on what comes next. The Turk did the same. The Turk is a different subject, and did is a verb attached to that subject. So we actually have two complete thoughts with a subject and a verb here. Napoleon moved his chessmen into battle, and the Turk did the same. We can't separate two complete thoughts with a different subject using just a comma, unless we have a conjunction. We would need like an and or a but or a yet or something like that. So no change isn't going to be correct. Similarly, it would be, it's not possible for it to be less correct, but it's almost like it would be less correct to just put nothing there. Napoleon moved his chessmen into battle, the Turk did the same. That would be a total run-on, even more so than having the comma there. They're both incorrect because we have different subjects and verbs. So now we're down to the semicolons. Well, if you'll recall what you know about semicolons, they can be used, or they are used to connect two separate but complete phrases. You can only use a semicolon to connect two complete phrases that have their own subject and verb. So you can use a semicolon here, certainly, because we have our own subject and verb. So then the question is just, do we use this since or not? Napoleon moved his chessmen into battle, since the Turk did the same. Well, since the Turk did the same wouldn't be a complete thought anymore. So this would actually make the sentence incorrect. So we're just going to have a simple substitution of a semicolon. Napoleon moved his chessmen into battle, semicolon, the Turk did the same. So that is our correct answer. And just remember, you can only use a semicolon where you could use a period. So we could put a period there, capitalize the T in the, and we would be in business. The semicolon just connects the thoughts. Again, we're going to start by looking at our answer choices and determine what kind of a change we need to be paying attention for in the sentence. So as I look at my answer choices here, I can see that I have variations on semicolons and commas. So I'm really looking at the inside of this sentence to see whether it should accommodate a semicolon or a comma, which means I'm looking for whether I have a complete sentence or something that should be one complete sentence or something that should be two complete sentences. So now I'm going to go over to my sentence. Today, the wanderers from Vung Tau want more than menial labor along the docks. They want to compete as fishermen. Okay, so today, the wanderers from Vung Tau want more than menial labor along the docks. So I'm going to identify my subject and my verb here. So I have the wanderers is my subject. The wanderers from Vung Tau want more than menial labor along the docks. So my verb is going to be want. So the wanderers want is really what I'm kind of thinking about here. They want more than menial labor. Now I'm going to go past my comma, which is what I already have here as a comma. They want to compete as fishermen. So I have another subject. They want. Okay, another subject and verb. They want to compete as fishermen. So I have two separate sets of subjects and verbs. So even though this pronoun they refers back to the wanderers, it's a it's sort of, you can think of it like we've refreshed our subject. That's kind of how I would think about it. So we're going to need, if we have a comma here, we would need some kind of a conjunction. We would need it to say something like, today the wanderers from Vung Tau want more than menial labor along the docks. Something like, today, not only do the wanderers from Vung Tau want more than menial labor along the docks, they want to compete as fishermen. Or we would need it to be two separate thoughts here, and they want to compete as fishermen. But actually, we don't have two separate thoughts. These thoughts are completely connected. It's sort of like, what do the wanderers want? They want to compete as fishermen. So a semicolon would make sense from the standpoint of two separate thoughts being connected, and it also makes sense from the standpoint of a subject and a verb on either side of that comma. So we definitely know it's not going to be no change because this comma can't go between a subject and a verb, like between two sets of subjects and verbs like that. So then we're left with a few different options here. Let's take a look at this last one first because it doesn't have a semicolon and we thought we might want one of those. Docks, yet they. Today, so I'm going to substitute it in. Today, the wanderers from Vung Tau want more than menial labor along the docks, yet they want to compete as fishermen. So grammatically, that actually sounds okay, yet they want to compete as fishermen. However, the word yet would be used if we were contrasting the initial statement with the next statement. That doesn't actually make sense here because we're actually complementing the first statement. We're saying they want more, and then we're clarifying what it is that they want. So even though grammatically this makes some sense, semantically, in terms of what it means, it doesn't make any sense, so we're going to eliminate that. So now we're down to semicolons. So between our semicolon options, we have one that's just straightforward. It's just a semicolon instead of a comma. And then we have another one that says however. Well, we're going to eliminate the one that says however for the exact same reason that we eliminated the one that said yet. We're not actually changing, we're not contrasting, we're complementing our initial meaning here. So this is our best answer choice, where we're just replacing the comma there with a semicolon to connect two separate but complete thoughts.
One of the most common errors that students make occurs when using ITS in all its variations. But in fact, the rule is pretty simple. Basically, it is a pronoun that is used to refer to a single inanimate object. For example, he picked up the rock and threw it in the river, where it is taking the place of rock in the second part of that sentence. Now, when we want to describe that rock, we can say that it is smooth and gray. Or, if we want to use a contraction, we can combine it and is. I'll put an addition sign here for the combination and get it apostrophe s. So when you see it apostrophe s, remember to replace this apostrophe s with is and see if the sentence makes sense. On the other hand, if we want to express possession, that something belongs to whatever it is, in this case the rock, we simply add the letter s. There is no need for an apostrophe. So if you see this word with no apostrophe, that is showing that the it is possessing something. So we could talk about the rock's color, its color, using this form right here. This may be a bit counterintuitive because most of the time we use an apostrophe to show possession. But just remember that this pronoun is an exception to the rule. And when you see an apostrophe, S, replace it with is because it's not possession. Moving on to the example at hand. When Germany demonstrated its full potential. Now, first, we need to determine what the "its" is doing here. And then we can pick the proper answer choice. The correct form here is going to be this form right here, "its" without an apostrophe, because we're talking about Germany's what? Germany's full potential. It is the potential of Germany. If we were to plug in "is" here, as the sentence stands as now, this no change option, it would make no sense. When Germany demonstrated it is full potential, sounds like gibberish. So we can cross out this no change. ITS apostrophe is always wrong, so if you ever see that, just immediately cross it out. It's not a word. And then we're going to decide on this answer right here. There is wrong because it's not even a possessive pronoun. It's not showing possession. We've already determined that's what we need. We hope that rules of punctuation for the writing section make a little more sense after watching this video. Knowing the rules discussed in this video will go a long way towards helping you improve your scores. Happy prepping!